Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We take more of your questions on today's show. Leading question about Kaleb Johnson's vision. Can that be a difference maker quickly this year for the Steelers offense? We'll also touch on a George Pickens question and more about the Steelers secondary all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. More on them later. All right, Steelers fans. Let's get to the call-in lines. Like I said, we've been working through the calls. We got so many stacked up, new ones coming every day. We appreciate all the calls because it's great talking with you guys and getting more perspective, getting more questions answered, more perspectives, more things brought to the channel here. Again, 412-223-6644. If you call that number, leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute, and we will be happy to get your question on the show. Also, I'm going to put this out there. Shout out to our listeners who are in penitentiary systems because we are getting those calls, but unfortunately, collect calls do not get on the voicemail. So I apologize for not being able to answer y'all's questions. I hope y'all doing all right. But without further ado, let's get to the first question that gets to the show. This is Paul from Greensburg asking about the Steelers running back situation.
Hey, Chris, this is Paul from Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and I just want to say that I were asked Kaleb Johnson, his skills to get to the line of scrimmage and have the vision get through the hole, unlike Najee Harris, it seems to be much better to me than than Najee had. And I love Najee because he's a big guy, whatever. But I think that his ability to see the hole, to look downfield, and to get in the clear and dominate the space going forward. Hopefully, our offensive line will be able to open some holes out for him. I would just like to know how you feel about him and our offensive line going forward into this new season. Love your show. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate your call, Bob. As always, you can call Bob at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. All right, Steelers fans, let's dive into this here. So Kaleb Johnson, of course, new Steelers running back. As I talked about yesterday, I don't think he's going to start the year as the Steelers starting running back, but I do think he'll end the year as the Steelers starting running back because I think he's that dynamic. I think that Jaylen Warren is they kind of know he's more of the bridge guy, but they're happy to let him be the starter at the start of the season because he knows the offense. I also think Jaylen Warren right now is more of a complete back than Kaleb Johnson because he is going to be so much better of a pass protector than Kaleb Johnson early on. Now, Kaleb Johnson's going to work at this, and I wouldn't be shocked if he gets this quickly, but like Jaylen Warren, one of the best pass blocking running backs in the league, despite being like 5'8". Like that guy is tough as nails. So I have to love that about him. But let's get to the Kaleb Johnson, Najee Harris question. So Kaleb Johnson's vision was one of the first things that popped up to me about him when I watched his tape. And yes, he was explosive, he was powerful, he was quick, but he was so decisive with the way that he would set things up. And there were times that I mean it, the way he used the Iowa offensive line was a lot like Le'Veon Bell, and just the way, and not like saying it was exactly like it, but the traits that he shared was the way that he would stack his offensive linemen with his patience. He would let guys climb to certain spots, and then when the time was right, he'd cut behind him, and he'd know exactly how to do that. And that's how he had several big runs for the Iowa Hawkeyes in his time playing for them. He really got in tune with where that offensive line was. And if you remember back when he first arrived for rookie camp, that was one of the first things I asked him when I was talking to him. And he was talking about it was a big part of the chemistry. We wanted to establish that early. And he's like, he has to do that all over again with his professional teammates. But I think he's happy to do that. That's the thing. And so that's something he recognizes. It's not about him, just about him making plays. It's about him understanding his offensive line, understanding how to fit with them, and understanding how to get behind them. And that's not to say Najee Harris didn't understand that, but I also think that it's the different caliber of players Kaleb Johnson got used to playing with. Let's look at just raw numbers from their last years in college. Najee Harris had averaged about 3.26 yards after contact per attempt, or per time he was contacted. That was an average per rush. Kaleb Johnson averaged about 4.42 yards after contact. Now, Najee Harris did have more missed tackles forced in his final year. Alabama with 71, Kaleb Johnson having 66. But as we all know, Najee Harris didn't have the home run speed. His longest career run in college football in his senior year was a 53-yarder. Kaleb Johnson has a 75-yarder as his longest. He also ran a 54-yarder, a 53-yarder, and a 64-yarder in that mix there. So he has no problem there. I also, when you look at how many breakaway runs that they had, Najee Harris had 252 attempts that in his final year. 18 of them were plays that went for 15 yards or more in plays that break away. 240 rushes for Kaleb Johnson in his senior year, so very close number to Najee Harris. 28 breakaway runs where it was 15 yards or longer. So that's another sign that Kaleb Johnson, he's been more explosive with this play. But I'll also say another thing that kind of goes in Kaleb Johnson's favor. Look at the offensive lines that they dealt with in Najee Harris's final year with Alabama. Guys that were big names on his offensive line: Alex Leatherwood, a first overall pick to the Raiders; Landon Dickerson, big time center, and I think he was a second round pick for the Philadelphia Eagles; and Evan Neal, a first round pick. I believe he went to the Giants. Huge picks right there, on Alabama's offensive line, as they kind of would be, right? They're Alabama. That's a big part of who they are. But you look at Kaleb Johnson's offensive line: Mason Rickman, Bo Stevens, Logan Jones, Connor Colby, Nick John. None of those names are ringing bells for you. I'll say this, though. Two of those guys were drafted in the 7th round. Mason Rickman was a 7th round pick, and Connor Colby was drafted in the 7th round this year as well. Kaleb Johnson was the highest drafted player out of Iowa this past year. And so I think that there's kind of it's not to say that his offensive line was bad or so much worse, but it wasn't with superstar college talent the way that Najee Harris's was. And I think with that, Kaleb Johnson still found a way to do that. Now, again, Najee Harris, I think he got a bad rap in Pittsburgh for his quote unquote vision, because there were times that there just weren't holes. The Steelers offensive line for much of his time there was just so bad. And people need to understand, when it comes to vision, a lot of times when you think, oh, this hole's open over here, it's not the designed hole. It's not what they were supposed to be attacking on that play. And so it's tough to anticipate that. And then times when you're supposed to anticipate that the right hole to open, it's not open. And so when you start to have that sort of popcorn where your offensive line isn't where it's supposed to be more times than not, and it's not consistently winning at the point of attack, then you start to doubt what you can rely on as a running back, and your decisions aren't as good. Go back and look at Rashard Mendenhall before the Steelers got Marquise Pouncey and the offensive line started to upgrade. Now, yes, everyone remembers Rashard Mendenhall for his fumble in Super Bowl 45, but in his rookie year, well, his rookie year didn't play much, but his second year in 2009, when the Steelers had him, the offensive line wasn't good. He was struggling. He couldn't figure out which hole to hit, and people were like, "Oh, I don't know if this guy he can't see anything. He just dances around." And then when they got Marquise Pouncey, just one really good offensive lineman, everything started to click for that guy, and you could see, oh, he is really dangerous when the ball is in his hands, and he was a big part of their reason why they even got to the Super Bowl that year. When you think back to all the things he did for them in the 2010 season, so and that's just an example of when people blamed a guy's vision for a bad offensive line. And Najee Harris certainly made mistakes with his vision, but I think that part of it was the Steelers' offensive line wasn't good, and so when you combine not the greatest vision, I still think it wasn't terrible or bad, but when you combine not elite vision with, bad offensive line play to below average offensive line play, you're going to have the struggles that you had that the Steelers had. But what the Steelers are hoping on is that this offensive line that we continue to talk about, and I continue to say, is the crux, is the pillar, is the biggest thing the Steelers need to get right this season. If the offensive line is humming, if they're pushing people around and being on point, it's going to make everything else this season seem so much easier. And if they do that, they're going to open up a lot of space for Kaleb Johnson and Jaylen Warren. And when it's Kaleb Johnson's turn, if that's the offensive line that he gets used to over the next 4, 5, 6, however long he's with the Steelers, that's going to be a serious threat. And then Kaleb Johnson's going to start to feel when he's supposed to cut, understand, anticipate how to counter different defenses. That's what Le'Veon Bell did so well. He had that same offensive line: Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, Marcus Gilbert, Villanueva, Rowan Foster. Those guys, once they were together, and Kelvin Beachum was in that mix too, once they had that crew down and they had an understanding of where they were supposed to be, and Le'Veon Bell felt that out, that's where you saw so many of his big plays come from. So, yes, I do think Kaleb Johnson can be a step up if the right things happen. But the offensive line needs to take a step up so that Kaleb Johnson's vision does pay off as he trusts those guys to win more and more matchups. If that happens, watch out, world. Kaleb Johnson could be a bad man for the Steelers at running back. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about something that happened with George Pickens this week and tie it back to some questions that we got about George Pickens that I think kind of delve back into why the Steelers are developing themselves as a roster and a locker room the way that they are right now. It's not just a question about George Pickens per se, because he's no longer a Steeler and a lot of people don't care, but I think it's a bigger question about where this team, where this organization is trying to get to. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first of all, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that could take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rugiet.com right now. Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL. When you get there, use code LockedOnNFL and you'll get 15% off your order today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but not FDA approved, and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here today, going through more of your questions. There was a bit of a time. I saved these two calls specifically because when these two calls came, they came back to back. And this was around the time of the George Pickens trade. And I thought it was like the duality of Steeler fans and how people felt at the time. There were people who loved the George Pickens trades. There were people who hated the George Pickens trade. I immediately came out and I was like, I think this is a mistake. I think that they could have tried to work it out with George and try to make it work. Things that I've heard since then have kind of furthered me and my understanding. Okay, I get why they made this move. But then, of course, there was the thing that happened this week where George Pickens did have a youth football camp that he was committed to in Pittsburgh after he was traded. It was reported that he recommitted to doing the youth football camp. He wanted to come back and do it in Pittsburgh, and his team of people informed the people who ran this youth football camp. But then apparently, I guess it was this week or recently, they were then contacted that he is not going to uphold that, and that the people there are the people that signed up for that are just not going to be able to meet him. Now, from what I understand, Pat Frymuth filled in. Good job, Pat Frymuth. But George Pickens, and that kind of put, I think, a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth about Pittsburgh. And it kind of goes back to the question as far as like, Why did the Steelers let him go? What was the point of letting go this guy who was your best player on offense last year? And as we talked about, like, you've talked about wanting that number 2 wide receiver. He becomes that number 2 wide receiver behind DK Metcalf in that situation. So letting it go. So let's do this. We're going to take 2 short calls, and this is going to just show you how different Steelers fans were at the time, and that's going to play into my reasoning and explaining what the Steelers are doing here. First, we got Bob from Altuna, who didn't like the George Pickens trade.
Hi, Chris. This is Bob in Altuna. Love your podcast. I think the George Pickens trade was a horrible, horrible trade. Got too little for him. Shouldn't have traded him in the first place. But I'm wondering if the Steelers are going to either try and sign or trade for Alan Lazard. Last I seen, he's with the Jets, to entice Aaron Rodgers to come to Pittsburgh a little more. Tell me what your thoughts on this. Thanks. Love your show. Bye.
Thank you, Bob. As always, calling like Bob did at 412-223-6644. As we can see, Steelers didn't need to sign Alan Lazard. Aaron Rodgers was coming. Now, I wouldn't put it past them to still try to bring Alan Lazard in at some point, but obviously they didn't need it to get him specifically in this instance. So, but there was Bob, didn't like the trade, liked the idea of him sticking around. But there was Keith out in Memphis, Tennessee, who was like, nah, I get it. I'm with it. What's next?
Hey, Chris, this is Keith from Memphis. Love the show. Listen to it on Spotify every day. I have a question about wide receivers. I'm absolutely fine with getting rid of George Pickens, yet another Pittsburgh Steelers drama mama. Do not want any more drama in our wide receiver room. What is it about the Steelers wide receiver room that is generating this culture of diva wide receivers? Antonio Brown, Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, and now George Pickens. Hopefully DK Metcalf doesn't bring any of that. I don't think he does. But why do we keep having this issue with divas in our wide receiver room? Anyway, thanks very much. Love the show. Take care.
Thanks, Keith. As always, call it 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. It's a good question, Keith, but I also think it's important to remember a lot of wide receivers are like this. When you look around the NFL, there's a lot of people like this. The only thing that usually masks it up is the winning. A.J. Brown was reading books on the Eagles sideline when he wasn't getting the ball. Then when they're winning Super Bowl, we all forget about that kind of stuff. And that's just one small example. There's plenty all around. And like when you think about Deontay Johnson and you think, man, it just kind of sucked when he would just run backwards on some plays, or he would, drop a pass here and there. He wasn't the most reliable playmaker, but he at least got his yards. He at least made some plays. He was at least the best route runner in football for the Steelers when he was in Pittsburgh. But then he goes to Carolina and it just doesn't work. And now he was, if you didn't see it, he was on a podcast this week admitting that he did not want to go into the game for the Ravens that one time during a game because it was quote unquote too cold. And he would put out bad tape because they kept him on the sideline for too long. And he thought like, well, I'm not going to be able to run my best routes now. Yeah, that Deontay Johnson did not exist in Pittsburgh. It just exists in these other teams that don't know, that can't seem to handle him that well. And I think that's the thing with the Steelers is that time and time again, the Steelers have tried and gotten these guys who they bring in. And listen, they make it work for as long as they can. Chase Claypool's best years still with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Antonio Brown's best years always were with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Juju Smith-Schuster, I will say, I'll push back on this. I don't think Juju was a diva. I think the TikTok dancing was just him being young and silly. But that guy was tough. That guy threw his nose in when he got that serious injury in 2021, and it was Ben Roethlisberger's last year, and he fought his way to come back, and he came back, and that dude is a tough guy. I don't want to put Juju in the same diva category because also he's a productive player for a Super Bowl. He's part of a Super Bowl championship team, and AB was too. But Juju Smith-Schuster has kind of regressed into being a role player, and he's fine with that, and he seems to be okay with that. I don't think it's fair to characterize him as a diva. But Chase Claypool, absolutely. Deontay Johnson, absolutely. George Pickens, absolutely. And to your point, that is a trend there. But I think it's also a sign. And you see Deontay Johnson. I mean, he didn't want to play in the cold. You see George Pickens, not honoring his commitments to kids in that situation. And that doesn't mean that he's a terrible person all around. It does mean that's kind of a sucky situation. That means a bad decision, I think, on his part that's going to make him look bad. It's let down some kids who really wanted to be a fan of his. And now, imagine if you're one of those kids, you're like, man, George Pickens didn't want to come and see me when I wanted to see him. And what if that was my favorite player? But Pat Freiermuth came through. George Pickens and George Pickens is gone. Deontay Johnson is gone. The Steelers are getting rid of those guys. And it seems to have been Omar Khan's mission since he arrived as GM to just not putting up with it. Because that was his first big move, right? Was trading away Chase Claypool and somehow pulling the Bears' natural second-round pick, which turned out into the first overall pick of the second round in the 2023 NFL draft. And still an insanely huge steal for them to get. And then just another year after that, they get rid of Deontay Johnson, and people think, oh, this is a terrible trade. They're only getting back Dante Jackson. Deontay Johnson's been on 4 teams since. Dante Jackson only lasted a season, but he was at least like a solid veteran number 2 cornerback for a little bit for the Steelers, and that's better than what everyone else has gotten out of Deontay Johnson since he left. And now you ask yourself, are the Steelers about to do the same thing with George Pickens all over again? Because if he's got these problems now and he's already becoming a thing, TJ Houshmandzadeh was saying like he's not surprised by seeing this. He's been around George Pickens. He said that on the Nightcap podcast with Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco, and he's like, I've been around this guy. He does not care about this kind of stuff. If George Pickens goes to Dallas and it doesn't work out and there's attitude problems and there's questions and stuff like that, I would not be shocked if everyone's sitting there saying, how did the Steelers do this again? How did they come away with real capital, with some sort of gains for getting rid of a wide receiver at the exact right time, while also getting their best time in their NFL with them? So I think part of this is the mission right now. They want a locker room that's about the team, not about themselves. And also, just doesn't have to get corrected. That just is a good follower, which turns into a good leader. And that's where I think the Steelers are looking for with these guys. DK Metcalf, just the professionalism that I see from him when he gets into Pittsburgh. And, I ask him, and I'm thinking like, oh, he's going to talk, not talk down about his teammates, but he's going to kind of acknowledge, oh, no, I'm definitely going to help Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson come along. And he said, no, I'm not here to – he didn't push away the mentor role potentially of them. He was like, hey, those guys are very good players in their own rights. They're, if they want to talk to me, if they want to ask me questions, they can. But I'll be here for them. But they're pretty good in their own. And so the humility that I hear out of DK Metcalf, despite being – $150 million was his contract number. So, he's got all this money. He's with this organization that basically said, we want you here. And, he's engaged to a pop star. DK Metcalf has all these things going on. And he's just like, I'm still here just to work. And it's a big part of what Aaron Rodgers talked about. We talked about that recently in the show as well. Like Aaron Rodgers said, like a big reason why I came to Pittsburgh was because of DK Metcalf and his leadership skills. And so, and what he liked about him there. So I do think DK Metcalf can be different. And I think the Steelers, they've tried for a time to get those guys, but now they need to try to get the guys that build the roster, because you could take swings on guys that are like kind of out there characters. And every great team has some guy like that on their team, right? Like you think back to the Steelers of the 70s. There were some of them dudes was crazy. Ernie Holmes was crazy, man. Shot shotguns at police helicopters and like was like in the core of the Steel Curtain, like that there's no doubt about that. And there's plenty of other stories if you read like books like Gary Palmer's Their Life's Work. There's some crazy stories about what the 70s Steelers were like back in the day. But you had those core guys around the people that were kind of out there and were kind of a little bit wilder, but you put up with them because they were just that talented. And that's part of what the NFL is, right? But you need those core guys. And I think the problem is for the Steelers, they've had those core guys on defense. They haven't had them on offense of late, and they need to find those guys. So this year is going to be a lot about the offensive line, but it's also going to be a lot about the emergence of the new leaders of the future. Does Joey Porter Jr. step up? Does Keanu Benton step up? Does Zach Frazier, Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, do those guys step up? If you see that generation of leaders start to come to the forefront, That's a very good sign for the Steelers moving forward about their culture, about their team, about their organization, and about how soon they can actually be a threat if those guys step up. And again, that all goes back to why I think George Pickens is proving the Steelers right already. When you see stuff like this and him not willing to honor those types of things, it's just more points in the column of, man, maybe Omar Khan did it again, because now he has 3 third-round picks going into next season, and that could be a major factor for him going training up and getting the quarterback that the Steelers want with the ammunition that they need to get. So that's the part of what I think there with the George Pickens situation, how it relates to what the Steelers are doing and are trying to build with their team. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, want to take a question about the secondary, including Juan Thornhill and a former Steeler, Mike Hilton. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by Gametime. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day, and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it possible. Here's why everyone should use Gametime. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. They've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Gametime is the official ticketing partner of the Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting MLB game. To take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue taking your questions here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's send it to Josh in Downington, PA, who's asking a question about the secondary.
Hey, Chris. Josh calling from Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Wanted to talk about Beanie Bishop. No, last season, at least for a rookie, he had a pretty good, solid year. Made really good interceptions, made some good plays. Definitely was not the best corner they had. But given that's year 2 and the slot corner, once again, is a questionable position, do you think it would not be a bad idea to bring in possibly Mike Hilton to kind of mentor him? I know back whenever Mike Hilton was on the team, they could really use him in the blitz game, and he would, have a lot of sacks when he was on the team, and just really reliable player. And also with the addition of Juan Thornhill, you can use that nickel coverage, use him as a slot, and maybe move around Beanie and maybe use him as a blitz piece. Wanted to get your thoughts on that. Love the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate you calling in. Again, it's 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute, and we'll try to get your question under the show like we have several of people on this show today. Let's dive into this a little bit. So first, I agree. Beanie Bishop, I'm hopeful for Beanie Bishop. He made some nice plays last year. He showed some good instincts. He could play. He is undersized, but he's tough, and he's willing to learn, and he's willing to get better. That's going to be interesting to watch. But like you said, the Steelers could use him to get better across the board, and I think against the run and helping inside the box is something that they definitely could get more out of Beanie Bishop for. And to bring up your point about Mike Hilton, that was his strength. He was so good. I mean, even better than coverage, I think, at times. He was kind of like an extra linebacker on the field with the way that was just also really, really short. I mean, I think he's 5'9" officially, but Mike Hilton would fly around. There was one time I saw that man stick Travis Kelce, who has basically almost an entire foot on him, and he just sticks his helmet in his chest and he drives him backwards, and he dominated him on that play. Mike Hilton was fierce. And in fact, Mike Hilton was actually my first Steelers training camp when he came on in 2017, I think it was. And he was, I just remember watching practices, and every time he broke up a pass, he would just yell at Mike Tomlin, "I'm too small, but I'm too small." And Mike Tomlin would eventually be like, All right, Mike, we get it. You're too small. But that was Mike's way of saying, like, don't underestimate me because of my size. And that tenacity, I think that's awesome. And I think Beanie Bishop has some demon time in him. He has some he wants to get in your face. He wants to be a villain. I think he does have that in his favor, but I think he doesn't have it in the way that Mike did about the run game. And that's where they want Beanie Bishop to be better at. Now, again, Beanie Bishop can get there. I think that he could. And Juan Thornhill is another guy with NFL experience that I think can help along these lines. There's a lot of smart guys in this secondary right now. Darius Slay, also a guy who I think could be good for Beanie Bishop to pick all these guys' brains to become smarter, to understand his role and to get there. Now, would you sign Mike Hilton just to make that happen? Mike Hilton's a free agent, so it might be worth it just to give it a shot. But I think you're also kind of like, well, wait a second. Last year we benched Beanie Bishop for a veteran slot cornerback who was coming back from another team after he had his successful stint with the Steelers and not so successful stint with another team, and then it didn't work out last year. Of course, that was Cam Sutton. So would you do it again this time around? Mike Hilton's 31 years old now. That's not super old or anything, but it's something to consider. I think the Steelers should look into it. I should see how much would it cost? I imagine not that much, and then just see how he fits in. And I think that could be really interesting to see if the Steelers could get a slot cornerback for the future. And Beanie Bishop might be it, but if he's not, Mike Hilton could be a guy that's right there, ready and raring to go. But still a lot to explore there moving forward, what the Steelers want to do in the secondary. Thanks again for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias, all the same handles everywhere at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here Monday with another episode on your Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.